I'm Kiara Dunstan, and I work for GBCA's marketing department as the marketing communications assistant. And I'm here today with Lynn Algrant. If you could please introduce yourself, Lynn.
Hi everyone, I'm Lynn Algrant. I'm new to GBCA, but I'm delighted to be here. I'm the Vice President of Planning, Development, and Communications.
Perfect. And we're just going to be talking a little bit about census, well, a lot of bit about census, and everything you might need to know as we're nearing the deadline for responding. And we're just going to jump right into a few topics. It's going to be a mini series where we're going to have different parts, and this is the first part. Okay, so Lynn, can we just talk a little bit about the history of census and maybe why it's so important for community members to respond and get active in this year's census?
Absolutely. So the census is actually in the Constitution of the United States. And as a representative democracy, we need to know exactly how many people are in the United States so that we can be represented. And so in the Constitution, it says that every 10 years, an actual count of every person in the United States needs to be counted, and that's a census year. And it's important because our members of Congress, the House of Representatives, is determined, the number of members of the House of Representatives that each state gets is determined by the census. And so if we don't have an accurate count, we don't actually have accurate representation. And the House of Representatives has 435 seats, no more, no less. And so it's actually a zero-sum game. If California or Florida grows faster in 10 years than New Jersey grows, New Jersey loses a congressional seat and it goes to that fast-growing state.
Right.
And over time, New Jersey has actually lost several congressional seats. Certainly in 2010, and I think also in the year 2000, we lost a congressional seat to some other state. So an accurate count is extremely, extremely important.
Right, of course. Just discussing a little bit about the accurate count and how it's really important for congressional seats and things like that. Can we talk a little bit about the minority community, how they're majorly affected by the fact that the numbers are low in response, and so they're impacted by that, because if we don't have the right number for them to be represented, then they're not getting their fair share. So can we talk a little bit about systemic oppression of response for the census, just as, you know, it is for voting and other things like that? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So also in the Constitution was that in the initial years when slavery existed, enslaved people only counted for 3/5 a person in the census. And so that's that 3/5 rule that we talk about. And so one of the things that I often want to emphasize about the census is that as African Americans, we were never meant to be counted. Right? We were never meant to be counted. And it wasn't until the 1850 census that each enslaved person was actually named. Before that, they would just say female 14, male 25. Right. And so I sort of feel like, from a historical point of view, that we want to count. And we do count, and we've always been here. And so certainly for African Americans, we need to make sure that we are counted, because there's a lot of resources and representation that gets lost to us and to our communities if we are not counted. And I would say for other minority and immigrant communities, it's extremely important for you to be counted as well. And there's been a lot going on in the last few years to try and frighten people from being counted in the census. And because I believe we don't want immigrants. I think that there is a systematic group of people who think that we don't want to count all the immigrants, because we don't want those states with large immigrant populations to get a fair share of the resources. And so the census is more important now than ever, in my opinion, because we can watch all these things happening that are trying to create an undercount. But we know that resources are too important, right? We're talking about $657 billion a year that is distributed by the federal government based on census data. So that's money for schools and Head Start, Medicaid, hospitals, roads, all of these things, food stamps. And in the moment of this pandemic, right, we're realizing how important all of those resources are. They come to New Jersey based on the census count. And so we need to make sure that everybody gets counted this year.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, immigrants being, one of the undercounted people in the communities. So it's important. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's a myth that, immigrants are not, are not supposed to be counted in the census, that they may not think that they're even a part of that count or should be a part of that count, but they really are, essentially. And if they're not counted, then, like you said, they're missing out on multiple resources, plenty of resources that they actually essentially need, probably more than a lot of other people. So it's really important for them to be counted. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is a myth that, immigrants and people who are not citizens of the United States are not supposed to be counted. And in fact, any actual living resident in the United States currently is supposed to be counted.
Absolutely. I like to think about it. Sometimes I use this analogy. If you think about a college town, right? Maybe in the summertime when the students are away, a college town has 10,000 people in it. But when the students come, right, then there are now 25,000 people in the town. And so you can see how a town that is a college town needs resources throughout the year for the 25,000 person population that they have when the students are there. That's how many police officers they need. That's how much usage their roads are going to get. Not in the sleepy summer months, right? And so immigrants, you're here, right? And you use the roads, and you need healthcare, and you need first responders. And so, yes, you need to be counted. Even if you can't vote because you're not a citizen, you still should be counted in the census. Absolutely.
Right. So with all of that said, Lynn, is there anything that you can talk about where we currently are with the census? Because I know census takers are out in the field now, and they're knocking on the doors of households who have yet to respond. Is there anything you can talk about surrounding that, and what people may be able to look out for or expect with that?
Sure. So first of all, I want to emphasize that you can still self-report your census by going online, and I know we're going to put the phone numbers and the website at the end of all these videos. So you can still, if you haven't completed your census for your household and your address, you can still complete it yourself on the phone or online. That is the best way to complete the census, because it's the most accurate, and quite honestly, it's the safest. But right now, starting, I think just last week, census takers in our area have started to go out and knock on doors. They get an assignment of addresses where the census form has not been completed. And they go, they knock on the door, they may call, and to actually take the census information from the people there. I will tell you that census workers, they have been fingerprinted, they have been vetted, they will have a big ID badge so that you'll know that they truly are a census taker. They have to swear an oath not to reveal anything they learned from the census all the way until they die. And if they ever violate that oath, they can be imprisoned for 5 years and a fine of $250,000. So they're not just random strangers knocking on your door, but at the same time, right now is a period of time when we don't really want anybody knocking on our door, right? And a lot of people don't feel safe having a government employee knock on their door. And so that's why it's so important to just go ahead and complete the census yourself online. That will take your household address off the table, and no one will be assigned to come and knock on your door.
Right. Okay, thank you, Lynn, for all of that information for our series part 1. That will be the end of our series part 1. And like Lynn said, if you need to respond and you want to respond, you can go online at www.my2020census.gov, and it's all of 10 minutes, 10 questions that it'll take you. It's very simple and easy. And outside of the online aspect of it, if you have not yet responded, you will, like Lynn mentioned, see a census taker come to your door and get that information from you. So that will be the end of our part 1. Thank you, Lynn, for all of that information.
Sure. Thanks, Kiara.
No problem.